most of my own beliefs are probably wrong. And the way you get to understand that is just look at the smartest people from 400 years ago.
There's really no way to explain truth. You can't put it into words.
George Bach said, all models are wrong, some are useful.
And I think people are like way, way, way more similar than they are different. It's really hard to have a good idea and create something magical without sort of submitting to this idea of something like bigger than yourself that you don't control.
All of the old playbooks and models are collapsing.
I had everyone tell me to start with either the toy or the book. And I said no. The magic is you mix both of those.
Well, hello everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with yet another Infinite Loops. Wow. Today I have on John Fio. I got to ask you about the shortening of the name, John, founder of Fio Companies and some new companies that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But, Fio Companies, man, like really, my first question is going to be, what the fuck? How did you do this? Because what he did was he started the company in 2016, bootstrapped 4 products via Kickstarter. Okay, I know nothing about that, so I'm going to ask you to educate me. And you've collectively done hundreds of millions of dollars on these 4 products. And man, like, you're amazing. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jim. I'm excited to dive into some infinite loops here. Let's go down the rabbit holes.
Whoa, there are so many rabbit holes. So many rabbit holes. First off, like, give me your origin story. For people who maybe on the off chance don't know who you are. Yeah. I know you quite well, but let's give our listeners and viewers your origin story.
Okay, cool. Go all the way back. I'll go really quick. Basically was a musician my whole life, grew up in Boston, was doing a bunch of, entrepreneurial stuff in high school, started a few little things, was selling stuff, had a band, all that kind of stuff. Ended up going to NYU on a jazz performance scholarship. So I was a drummer, going around to all the jazz clubs, playing, and then I dropped out for a second and went on the music side of things and went to go work on Justin Bieber's team. I was officially his first intern. Pretty funny little sidestep there. And then from there, I kind of saw the possibilities of what it meant to start your own company and went back to New York and I really ran at this idea that I was going to start something and make something work and build some sort of consumer experience for an audience. Essentially, that's kind of what I was doing with at Bieber's team. Was essentially like kind of playing this call and response with his audience, and I saw how unbelievably powerful it was when you have this concentrated audience that is sort of there and engaged in a really insane way, how you can kind of have this new form of dialogue to find what essentially they want. And so that's what I did. I went out on my own and I started to kind of build tiny little audiences and engage with people in different ways. And that sort of led me to embarrassingly starting a YouTube channel and doing product reviews. And that kind of led me to this place where I was kind of taking the viewers on this journey of, I'm going to search the world, find some stuff and show you what I'm doing in order to find an insight to create a product for you all. And ended up, I was the first Allbirds review, big claim to fame there, did a few product reviews and then stumbled onto this idea of a weighted blanket. And, was the first, commercial weighted blanket on the market. We put that on my Kickstarter. We did, gravity blanket, on my Kickstarter. And, in 30 days, we ended up doing about $5 million in pre-sales. And that kind of, set me down this journey of building consumer brands, bootstrapping them, did not raise venture, very deliberately there. And kind of took the momentum from Gravity Blanket and then have kind of siphoned that into reinventing the beanbag, Moonpod, a personalized astrology gift company called Birth Date Company, and then recently a stuffed animal company, a weighted stuffed animal company, Moon Pals, that comes with this whole lore of magical creatures that live on the moon, watch over Earth, and come down and save the world with their magical hugs. So that's it. That's the story.
There are so many paths to go down there. You've said some really interesting things, like ideas are harder than execution.
Yes.
And another thing you said was consumer businesses that require investment aren't viable. So tell me about both of those. But then also for people who don't know about how you can do this via Kickstarter, that you don't necessarily need to come to venture capitalists, either like me or like the traditional model.
Totally. Yeah. So, are those tweets?
These come from my crack research team.
Okay.
Yes, they were all quotes. They were all quotes and source.
So those were probably tweets, which, by the way, the secret to Twitter is saying something incredibly objective that's both half true and half false. And you just say that, and then everyone fights, and then you get a ton of followers. So those tweets and brash statements are mostly true in my mind. But, they have some caveats. So the first one was ideas are harder than execution. I will die by that sword. I think, there's been, a recent sort of meme in startup world for the past 10 years that ideas are worthless and it's all about execution. And I think the only people that really believe that are people that have never had a good idea before. Because actually having a good idea is like just unbelievably hard, right? Like just these tiny insights and the repositioning of a few words that sort of sit in someone's mind can basically unlock an entire new universe, right? And you can see that, with, again, like there's countless examples of this with the startups in the past, 10 or 15 years, but like, Airbnb, the sentence and the insight, there's been forever scaled businesses of renting businesses and, couch surfing and whatnot. The idea that you will go to someone else's home and pay them to stay in a spare room is a sentence. That is an idea. That idea unlocked, an endless amount of scalability, an entirely new world, an entirely new use case. It literally moved tectonic plates around the earth. That sentence, right? And all of that execution that can be taught would never have existed without someone having that insight and a moment of an idea. Another one to back up that is sort of the, there's a famous Warren Buffett quote around, invest in businesses that a stupid person can run, because at some point they will. And, I think that's a really interesting framework, right? Like you can basically teach anyone to run a McDonald's or a Subway. That is a teachable thing. For someone to have the insight of rearranging a food line to, kind of create a new category of fast food that sits in an entirely new use case than dining, that is a very, very unique idea. And, again, just go and challenge anyone. Go and teach them how to do an executable task. They will be able to do it. Go and ask them for a world-changing idea, and you're gonna have a lot harder time getting that out of someone.
I actually totally agree. And the interesting thing for me is that, my son, Patrick, came up with the name custom indexing.
Good.
One tiny change,
Yep.
right? So in the old asset management world I lived in, everyone knew about indexing, right? And for a long time, indexing did so much better than active management that everyone loved it. And everyone professionals at least, knew about direct indexing, right? But Patrick simply put custom indexing. And by doing that, he created a brand new category in asset management.
Yep. It's a totally different product, right? Like it's a totally different user. The customer that is attracted immediately has a brand new world and a moment in their head. There's again, countless examples of this. Viagra was one, energy drinks was another, gravity blanket was essentially one, right? Like there was a thing that was out in the world being used for this very specific case. And I kind of just said, I found that secret and I repositioned it. And now we have a totally different product that is serving a totally different market that has now basically changed the way a large portion of the population sleeps. That was a lot harder than figuring out how to ship a blanket.
Let's talk about the gravity blanket, because you and I chatted about it when you were here for lunch. They existed, but you completely repositioned them. By the way, another reframe I love is it used to be called death insurance and nobody bought it. But then when they changed the name to life insurance, like billions in sales.
Yeah.
So the power of just a slight reframe is enormous. So
what's that scene in Vice that movie where they decide to call it an estate tax or something?
Right. Exactly.
They're sitting there with all these people like, oh, it's like, oh yeah, well, now we have a customer. Okay.
So tell me about the gravity blanket experience, and also, again, a little primer on Kickstarter might be helpful for the people listening and watching.
Totally. Yeah. Kickstarter is a platform that you can go to basically present an idea to their audience and say, is this something that you want to essentially pre-fund me to help create it? And I had a very strong opinion about venture capital when I was going out to start these businesses, where I really did not believe that the venture model really clung and enabled and was well positioned to exist in a consumer reality. I was like, there's just no way that these businesses are like real. Like, you can't buy brand. You can't, convince a customer with more money that they should stick with you. It's just like it doesn't really work for the venture model, right? Consumer is not a line up and to the right. It's this, up and down motion that venture does not really allow for. So, I wanted to bootstrap these things. Kickstarter was a really interesting way to go to a large audience and say, hey, I have this idea. I'll give you a discount if you pay up front and I'll ship it to you in 6 months. So that's essentially what Kickstarter is. And that allows you to, sell your product or idea to an audience base that is willing to pay for it before you have to do anything. And so, the entire campaign of Kickstarter did not really cost really anything except for time. I made, essentially handmade one gravity blanket, photographed it, put it up on this website and said, hey, who wants to buy this from me? I have this new, invention idea of a 25-pound blanket. And, boom, in 30 days, we did $5 million. So, that goes back to the second quote that you mentioned in the beginning of, if you're selling a consumer product, a physical consumer product, you almost certainly don't need to raise money, right? Like, you need to figure out some way to finance some sort of momentum. But especially today with something like Kickstarter, the internet, or Twitter, you basically can create a mock-up of anything for no money, put it out into the world, and there are enough people out there that are connected and watching you that will pay you for that idea or product upfront, and then we'll give you the time and space to say, go make that and ship it to me in 6 months, which is an incredibly attractive financing option for an entrepreneur. So I would totally suggest, most of my day of advising startups or entrepreneurs is basically telling them that they don't need to spend any money building anything, and they just need to get a ton of customers waiting in line before they spend money building anything. Because if you don't have customers around the block on day one, I could almost guarantee that no amount of money or product or R&D is going to really make that magically appear. Again, the idea is harder, right? Getting the idea and being able to, pitch that or tell that or explain that to a customer where it makes sense in their head, where, they are like, oh, a 25-pound blanket that helps me sleep. That is the thing. And boom, they are signing up and they're sending me $250 to have that thing in their hands in 6 months. And I think if you have a consumer product, or really a consumer anything that someone is going to consume, really just, if you're trying to sell something to a customer, you basically can make that sale with a sentence out of your mouth before having anything really built or essentially real. And so, yeah, that's kind of the approach that I took to launching these businesses.
So thank you for the Kickstarter thing. I think actually that's a great idea for people with those kinds of ideas. It also gives you immediate market product fit to speak VC. Because like some of the things we've invested in had that very thing attached to it, right? Like we invested in a group that teaches little kids chess and Go and things like that, but they do it all through storytelling.
Yep.
And literally they decided to open a store in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and, not to any business plan, not to anything. They just thought, hey, we should probably have a store. And literally the line went around the block.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, the people have spoken.
Yeah.
First off, like my friend Rory Sutherland, who's also on our advisory council, he has a great line, which is the single greatest strength of free markets is their ability to generate incredibly innovative things whose popularity makes no sense. Okay, but like gravity blankets, there was an existing very small market in psychiatric hospitals. And I think your genius was, hey, wait a minute, let's flip this and make it all about sleep. But you also have lots of empirical evidence for why that works. Tell me, first off, does the idea just come to you? Because I'm going to also ask you to help our listeners, like how do you become an idea generation machine? And also with you, great idea, sold lots of blankets by reframing, but lots of empirical evidence too. Talk about that a bit.
Where do you want me to start? The idea thing?
Yeah, please. Let's go there first.
I think I don't know if your researchers caught this one, but I tweeted the other day that I think probably one of the most like profound questions is, where did that idea come from? Where did you get that idea? And it's really, really, really crazy when you actually start to go down that, okay, so I thought that, but where did that thought or idea come from? And I think the weird answer is that I have no idea, right? Like I have no idea. It definitely doesn't feel like mine. It doesn't feel like a unique thought that I had. It feels like something like hit me. Or like, yeah, it's not like I'm like crafting these things. It's like a weird sensory input of a billion things where I kind of have this hallucination of like something that I think I might have seen. Then I'm like, well, wait, did I see that? Or did I just imagine that? And wait, what if that actually did exist? I don't know. That's kind of so like, I mean, a good example is, and then I think it's again, like, you can't, if you want to have good ideas, you have to do good and true things that not a lot of people are willing to do, right? And so, like, a good idea is easy. A good big idea is hard. A good big idea that's different is really, really hard. And so, you have to be doing something different. You have to have a really good sense of what is right and wrong. And then you have to be able to have almost, no ego or self to be able to sort of recognize, a thing that exists in the world that people are, reacting to. And I think if you can use yourself as the first person, that's a pretty good place to start. The story that I was going to tell was that when I had the idea for Moonpod, the beanbag, and maybe this helps, people think about how to get weird ideas. Moonpod came from a weird whim trip I took to Japan. I was in China. I had, for the first time, about a week of openness where I had nothing to do. And Japan had been on top of my list forever. I was alone. I just bought a plane ticket, went to Japan alone without any plans. And that, that right there is somewhat of a strange thing to do, right? Like, I know people that go on vacation alone. I know a lot of people that go on vacation alone to Japan. I don't know a lot of people that have decided to go on vacation alone to Japan in probably less than 24 hours. And that sounds like a tiny little subtle thing, but like the energy and the sort of experience that happens in my heart and brain, just having that subtle shift of like, boom, in a day, you're in this foreign country. You don't know anyone. You can't speak the language. Now just try to have fun. That right there gives me an entirely new lens to the world in a very strange way that kind of lets me have this super, super unique experience that is very hard to replicate or plan for, right? So there's probably not a lot of people that were experiencing Japan in that same sense and in that same sort of mindset that I was in. That, being said, I was, walking through Japan in different ways, checking out certain things. It was like, okay, I'm going to go down to Kyoto. I go down to Kyoto. I go and check out, a few of these rock gardens, and, my hallucination of a bunch of stuff trying to work and make sense of the world, basically brought me to this moment where I looked at a monk in a rock garden sitting on a rock meditating. And I was like, wow, that's one of the most peaceful, beautiful, amazing things I've ever seen. But my stupid American brain immediately did not think that he was sitting on a rock. I thought he was sitting on a beanbag. And I was like, is this monk meditating on a beanbag? And then I was like, whoa, that's like so funny. I was like, but again, that really came for, if I were to say, why did I think like that? That was the first day that I was in Japan. Why did I think like that? Again, like these tiny subtle things that you can do that will force your brain to have a reaction that might have a really interesting idea. Why did I think of a beanbag chair in this really weird, strange way? I had no plans or had no expectations of being in Japan. And so my brain, all of a sudden, 24 hours, classic, basic American boy, boom, you're in Japan. You're seeing a rock garden. I didn't have time to understand what a Japanese rock garden was. I see this thing. I think it's, a stupid American beanbag. And then all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, wait, what if I kind of reinvented a beanbag to look like that, to have that experience of a monk meditating in a Japanese rock garden? I'm going to build this whole idea around trying to recreate a product that's going to give everyone that moment. And that was sort of the birth of MoonPod, which again, like that is, I've had like 3 espressos, so I'm sorry, but like, you know, like that is sort of a weird mix of an amalgamation of what happened in my brain and in the world to sort of have this mix of a weird moment of like, you know, that Japanese rock garden, I mistake it for being a beanbag. And now all of a sudden, you know, now I have literally the biggest beanbag company in America.
You know what's great about that is there is, again, back to marrying empirical research with an event like you just described. There's a ton of research that shows, hey, if you want to change yourself, change your environment.
Totally.
And like, that's a great example. And the other thing that's really cool is you didn't have you went on a whim, right? Yeah. So the willingness to, as George Mack says, widen your luck circle, right? Yeah. In other words, put yourself in situations that are going to increase your ability to have luck. But there's also this whole idea of co-creation that I've really come to embrace. And it really opens your aperture. And by co-creation, I mean, like there's a guy, you know, I'm a big fan of William Blake, the mystic painter and author. By the way, look at his, now this is 2 centuries ago. Look at some of his paintings and you'll find one is a perfect example of the strand of DNA. Yeah. And when you read what Blake said, he said, I just had these visions. Yeah. And what's really interesting to me is a lot of the formulas for quantum mechanics and physics came under similar circumstances. In other words, like I was sitting under a tree and had, you know, my ears blocked and suddenly the perfect formulation. Tesla is another guy, right? So this idea of, look, the universe is something maybe much weirder and crazier than I can understand with my human brain. But like, there's a lot of theories. Huxley is another one who grab ideas from what used to be called the ether, what you know, Sheldrake calls the morphogenic field. Yeah, and people get really weirded out when I start talking about this. But like,
you want to know what a weird about more is when you actually start describing that ether and the magnetic field is God. Then they really get freaked out, which is, you know, a little bit of a funny thing where we're at today.
And yeah, I mean, and especially today, like here is a book that I thought of you. I'm holding up the book, The Genius of the Beast, a radical revision of Capitalism by Howard Bloom. I'm going to send you a copy of this because I think you're going to love it. Because what Bloom argues is we have so let the execution part, the left brain part, dominate all of business for so long that what we really need to do is understand that the reason free markets work is because they address humans' emotional needs. And he basically says emotions, desires, that is what other people call demand, right? Consumer demand, right?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we're in this weird sort of leveling moment in the world right now, where for the last, 20, 50 years, we had this sort of illusion of control. And, we have all these scientific formulas that lead to this measurable outcome. And the last, year or so, a lot of those have completely shattered. And, you find out that thing that we knew as fact forever was actually bought and paid for by a company. And this thing that was, a fact actually, scientists just discovered a new molecule that completely discredits everything. And now we have aliens showing up. It's like, we're kind of having this weird, ego death, like the societal ego death of like, oh shit, like I actually can't control all of this. I actually don't know the answer. And I think when you're talking about art and having ideas and creation, it's really hard to have a good idea and create something magical without sort of submitting to this idea of something like bigger than yourself that you don't control. And that is kind of, when you start to step outside of yourself and you start to sort of watch what you were talking about, the ebb and flow and the waves of the market or consumers or people. And that is, a very uncomfortable and scary place for a lot of people to go to. And I think, my counter, everyone thinks that like these crazy artists are like unbelievably egotistical and, oh, look at them. They're obsessed with themselves. I think Kanye is the best example of this. Is like everyone thinks that he's this like egomaniac. I guess maybe paradoxically, but actually like it is impossible to create on the level that he's created for as many people as he's created to have an ego. I actually would say that the mistake that people make when they look at this archetype of a maniacal artist is that, they're egotistical and self-obsessed and attention obsessed. I would say it's the exact opposite, that they basically have completely submitted themselves to this idea that they actually do not and cannot create anything for themselves. And they've submitted to this idea that it is all for this people and, for the ether, for God, right? You see a lot of these things happen where in this, again, like the second you have a moment where you kind of create something that gets someone else to have a reaction and you really reflect on what happened in your brain and in your part to be able to create that for that person to have that reaction, if you have a sense of yourself during that motion, that moment of creation, I can basically promise you that the reaction that other person has when they experience that creation is not going to be as strong or as magical as if you completely let go and submit to this idea that you are creating from not yourself or for yourself, for something way, way, way bigger. And I think that's, kind of a weird, it's a weird kind, it's something that has fallen by the wayside recently with things being so measured and this idea of worshiping data and numbers and formulas. I'm really excited that we're kind of getting to a new place in the world where we're actually figuring out that there's another side to that coin, that a ton of that data, numbers, and measurements could be completely and incredibly wrong. And that's a really fun place to be if you're trying to create something.
Totally agree. And what's interesting is like I always try to fashion my current thinking about this to the person I'm chatting with, right? So like if you're dealing with a hardcore materialist in the scientific sense, right? Not somebody who's a big consumer, but naive realism. In other words, what we see is out there, and everything exists without our interacting with it, etc. I simply slip into, well, then read The Beginning of Infinity by David Deutsch, because what he explains is like certainty is death, like literally death.
Yeah.
And when it's stasis leads to death. Movement is life.
Yes.
And guess what? Go back. Lao Tzu was writing about this centuries ago,
Yeah.
and you can find it everywhere. But then you say to the materialist, "Hey, it's a complex adaptive system," and immediately they're like, "Oh, that makes sense."
Yeah.
So, in other words, ideas emerge from below, not from above, in a complex adaptive system, and then like you can get them on board. But it's really interesting as I've adjusted my own thinking. Like certain things are great to have just the facts, ma'am. Like my old field of quantitative investing, really for that particular domain, very, very helpful.
Yeah.
But for these kinds of domains, use it to support, use it to generate ideas, but like then not nearly as important. In fact, we're doing a whole series called The Great Reshuffle that you and I talked about, Like all of the old playbooks and models are collapsing.
Yeah.
They don't work anymore.
Yeah.
And it's taking people first off, it's really pissing people off. And
Yeah.
secondly, they have great reticence to embracing the new way of looking at the world.
Yes.
And I personally think like its time has come because, you mentioned Da Vinci and the woodpecker, and I like that story. But I also had a thought as I was getting ready to chat with you again, is that it seems to me that people, I hate dichotomies, I hate labeling, but this is going to be just a useful discussion point.
Okay.
So with that proviso, right? Like I had two thoughts. One were, I hate dichotomies because you're not one or the other, right? You're
Right.
not a Myers-Briggs ENTP. If you self-label yourself or a Big Five or an Enneagram or any of that kind of stuff, like I know a lot of people who just love that shit, and I find it interesting, right? Because I just look and say, okay, interesting. But back to the dichotomy, right? So there are two thoughts that I had were people who believe that there is some external truth with a capital T are forever bitterly disappointed because they spend a lot of their life looking for that truth, which is exogenous to them. And we can talk about like maybe there is, and maybe people are getting to it in a variety of different ways. That's fine. But and then the other people who are like, you know what? Most of my own beliefs are probably wrong. And the way you get to understand that is just look at the smartest people from 400 years ago. Take the smartest man in the world or woman from 400 years ago and look at their beliefs, and almost all of them are wrong. And
Yep.
so when you have that kind of attitude, which is, hey, right now this is the best explanation, but guess who's really good at generating new ideas, innovations, explanations? We humans, right? And so we are very much in the loop, so to speak, on the idea and generation and these better explanations. And then a separate dichotomy, which I think works pretty well too, is wizard versus warrior, right? So are you a wizard, which is an abundance mentality where you're like, hey, I'm going to grab an idea from the ether and I'm going to play with it and I'm going to see what happens. Or are you a warrior? What warriors do is like, there's a fucking treasure behind that goddamn dragon in the cave, and I'm going to kill the dragon and I'm going to grab his treasure. To me, that's kind of like the ultimate scarcity mindset. So, reaction.
Okay. All right. You want to do? God, it's too hard. Conversations are too hard. My new thing is that I want to do an experiment where you have people to a place for a week and you make them hang out, but no one's allowed to talk.
Those exist.
Yeah, but not like the woo woo, like yoga, like silent. Right. It's like, no, like you have to find, like, I just think very interesting things would happen. Like objective leaders would emerge, right? Like there's no amount of words that I can say that can like trick people into doing something. Like there's a very real objective reality in, this idea of like talent or like destiny. Like without using words or code or descriptions, like everyone knows who is, the smartest person in the room, or, even, taboo, the most beautiful person in the world. I think all of this stuff is way more binary and objective than people think, which is why, the wizard and the warrior or paradox is one that's always been in my brain. I think it's in a lot of people. and I talked about this with Patrick on his podcast, is that I think, you know, I think the real goal is to figure out and accept that both of those pieces are a part of essentially everyone, and that the actual real goal is to not be certain that you are one or the other, like we talked about.
Right. Exactly.
It is the forever, rep of how do I integrate both of these things and become the wizard warrior, right? And again, if you look at the true masters who are objectively world shaping, great, heroic humans that existed, I would argue that they really, really figured out how to get both of those things right at the same time.
By the way, that was what's so funny is that exactly was my conclusion as well.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Our second book that we're going to write together. I actually have most of this written, but it was a really like bro-y framework that I came up with in high school, but it's like super, super true. I had this like, idea and this realization that like, because I kept on going back and forth. I was a jazz drummer, and then I was the captain of the lacrosse team. And I was like, which one? And I was like, am I EQ or IQ? And it's like going back and forth. And then in high school, I was like, you know what? No, I'm MQ. Like I need to be the motion quotient. I should measure myself in terms of motion. And motion is the only truth. And that the motion emerges from understanding the resonant point that you exist on between the IQ and the EQ. And when you get both of those right, then you sort of like resonate, wavelength, boom, and you shoot, right? And you just move. To me, that is the true form of, greatness, intelligence, and truth, is when you can find someone and you feel something that has both of those, the yin and yang, working in tandem. And that is what I would probably call, MQ, for lack of a better term. And, I think that's kind of, what a lot of this forever battle is figuring out, and again, just being open to the fact that like, that is this forever non-ending, task that you have. And I think people,
one might even say infinite
loops. But yeah, I mean, I think you can see this a lot when you talk to, if you go and talk to like a super, super famous or accomplished just artist, they kind of have this like really, really, depressive attitude to them of like, well, I'm just making this stupid shit, right? It's like, oh, I'm just like doing this, and these people, whatever. And then similarly, top of the circular spectrum, you go and talk to, a trader that, just traded, or a guy that just saw an opportunity and sold his company for $500 million. All that guy's doing is, how do I take all this money that I earned, and how do I go buy really cool, famous art friends, right? Like, or like, how do I like invest in my passion projects now? And it's like, you missed it, man. Like, the artist missed it, and the trader missed it, where like the purpose and the real fun game that never ends is, how do you become the artistic trader? And, I think that's like that is the sort of path, or the framework that I kind of try to use, to go down and build what I'm building. And I've had everyone tell me that I'm the opposite all the time, right? Like, I had so many people when I had these ideas for marketing, just tell me, oh, dude, you're so good at marketing. Just be a marketing agency. And I was like, yeah, but then you're kind of just, you're leaving all of this enterprise value on the table. And they're like, well, why do you care about that? You're an artist. And I was like, I don't know. I kind of want to compete. And then, you go and you talk to the artists, and they're like, oh, you soulless, like capitalist, like, how do you just go and like work on Wall Street or something? And it's like, well, no, I really like creating stuffed animals for children and telling a story around them. It's like, well, how do you get both of those existing together? And I think doing that and flexing those muscles and building that sort of creation mechanism in your brain and your heart is a really, really fun way to go through life where, I I feel like I am really excited about life in a fairly unique way because I get to flex both of those muscles at the same time. And that has, been really, really exciting for me uh, over the past, 5 to 10 years of building this stuff. Is I get to be the artist, I get to be the wizard and the warrior. And it's just a longer game. It's really hard. It's not going to happen in a 5-year exit. It's going to happen in a 40-year journey. And, you just got to be patient and sort of enjoy playing both sides of the game.
Could not agree more. And the interesting thing is, like, for me, what resonates so strongly is, like, I've been reading the Tao Te Ching since I was 18 years old. And then kind of when I was in my mid 50s, I finally began to understand it.
Yeah.
And like, that's the message, man. It's yin yang. You've got to have them together.
I loved your tweet. Was that a real tweet?
That was a real tweet, but I took it down because
you deleted it?
Well, I learned that they had stacked the deck, and I know. What John is talking about, it was a tweet of a quantum event happening, quantum entanglement, I think, if my memory is right, and it looks just like the symbol of the Tao. But what's really interesting is it's like physics is coming around too now, right? In terms of the way they're looking at things. And a really interesting thing is, like, most of the, like, I think I brought up the book, The Two Cultures by C.P. Snow when we were chatting when you were here.
Yep.
And like the book was like, essentially, why have we separated these two, science and art? Like, it's insane that we have separated these two.
Yeah.
And so I think that, the ability to, and I love because the other thing about the Tao is it's all about movement, right? I have tweeted many times, stasis equals death, movement equals life, right?
Yeah.
And that which is brittle breaks easily, that which is supple bends with the thing. And, like, in these simple concepts are really profound ways to look at, hey, well, maybe I should be trying to incorporate that much more into the way I'm doing things. But as you say, it's like really hard.
It's really hard.
Another thing you say that I want to talk about is the idea that magic is real. So talk to me about that. I love it because it also is part of that whole this illusion of certainty. One of the things that I've found about human OS that's a real pitfall is that we crave certainty to such an extent that, like, we were talking earlier, right, about, like, beliefs and things that people think of as true. As you go through time, if you study history, right, yeah, there are some elemental things that are really interesting to like watch transform. It's kind of like George Bach said, all models are wrong, some are useful. And I really agree with that. It's like when Ptolemy came up with his astronomy, right? Completely wrong. Completely, utterly wrong.
Yeah.
But fucking useful.
Yeah.
You could navigate through the Ptolemaic system like you never could before. And then we got a better explanation, right? Copernicus came along. If you are open to this idea that, hey, let's just keep our minds completely open for better explanations, better ideas, you come up with things like that. But talk about, throw the magic into the mix for me.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like, that's like a fun sentence to yell at people. and look them dead in the eye and be like, no, like magic is totally real. And, they kind of get freaked out a little bit, but, there's a really annoying philosophical way to kind of deconstruct that, which is, what is magic, right? Like, what is that? And, to me, magic is this, I think probably, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. I think magic to me is sort of this moment where, objectively, your free will is sort of extracted, like you basically have no choice but to have this reaction. And, again, like it's really hard to find someone who can look at, the Sistine Chapel or something, or the statue of David and be like, not, I miss that one. Like everyone that goes and experiences these things has this element of like, whoa, like their soul sort of leaves their body and they sort of have this moment of like, whoa. And like, I think you can say that about a lot of things, right? And I think people are like way, way, way more similar than they are different. And when I say magic is real, it's this idea that something so profound is happening that, it sort of has this objective, it elicits this objective reaction that is completely unexplainable. Right. And like, again, you can say that, you can have this explanation through some sort of quantum entanglement lens, or you can have this explanation around like, why do babies just clap or like smile and laugh? I actually think, I think the recent thing, we're kind of experiencing this weird magic right now on TikTok. There's a TikTok trend that I stayed up and watched last night, probably like 20, 30 minutes of girlfriends asking their boyfriends of, hey, babe, how often do you think about the Roman Empire? And this is something that no one really has ever talked about, but there is this, and I was like, yeah, like totally, at least once a day, at least.
Same with me.
Yeah, like 100%. And every guy, every shape, every size, interest graph, they look like they play football. They look like they're an artist. They look like they're a scientist. Every guy's response to this is, yeah, a couple of times a week. And girls are just like, what is happening? How do you explain that? That is this weird idea existing in the ether that has this, objective reaction from a male that gets us thinking about this idea and world that cannot escape the masculine soul. How do you explain that? Show me a model and I'll show you why that's wrong. You show me a trend or a thing that this is some sort of like, artistic, mimetic thing to be in on a joke. Wrong. Like there is no explanation for what's happening, that a unspoken true law has existed in the male mind that just their imagination wanders to the Roman Empire. And to me, how else do you explain that other than that is just an unexplainable magic in the world where we can all sort of giggle and laugh about how amazing this experience is, and there is no explanation. And so, you can call it magic, you can call it coincidence, you can call it an anomaly, you can call it God, you can call it the ether. But I am a big, big, big believer that magic, God market is real for sure. And I can't explain it, but I know that it's real.
Yeah. And one of the ways that I try to reframe it, because I do tend towards the more analytical and logical. And the way I try to reframe it is along the lines of, all of my beliefs, all of everything, like I'm sure I got many of them from people. I didn't give my permission, right? They inserted them into me. Like this idea, when I saw that, I didn't see the TikTok, but I did see it on Twitter. I just started laughing. I just started laughing out loud.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I turned to my wife and I said, how many times a week do you think I think about the Roman Empire? And she goes, oh, well, with you, probably every fucking day.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is something that can be tuned into, and you're like, you just have to kind of leave the explanation. There is no like explanation for why, and I love things like that because that is so funny and true.
Yes,
and to just be cool with that, right? Like, okay, so
that's kind of. I think all of there's an element of bullshit what we're doing right now, right? Like there's really no way to explain truth, right? Like you can't put it into words. So like everything. Who has the interesting quote about how back to this is my recent obsession about no words allowed at my hangout. I think it's Nassim Taleb or some guy on Twitter or whatever always talks about how truth is impossible to translate through word. And so any social situation, the more social the situation and the environment is, the more removed from truth and reality that environment exists in. And like, you can kind of totally see that, right? Like you go and sit in the mountains alone in Montana and you're like, this is God's country, right? Like this is real. You go to a nightclub in New York and LA and you're like, this is totally detached from reality. And that is the social scene, right? So socialization is essentially, a degree away from truth because it's impossible to actually talk about it. So I tell everyone, don't go and read Rick Rubin's book on how to create a masterpiece because the book is fake. There's no instruction manual. There's no repeatable formula here. There's no word that's going to do that. You kind of have to go and walk down the path. And I think that, that is like kind of poking at a really, again, that like fundamental, a fundamental reality that, there is a thing that you can't explain. And that probably is what we would try to explain as truth, but it's felt, right? Like it's felt and it is objective. And that is a real thing that happens.
I used to, as you know, I've one of my hobbies still to this day, much more when I was younger, but was like writing worlds, writing scenes, writing like ideas. And one of the ideas that I had that I was just going back through a journal and found, and I liked a lot, was this idea that ground state reality is society. Ground state reality is where like the reality tunnels of most people who are collected in that society align more or less, right? Like not completely, never, but how cool would it be if we could move up from ground state reality and move and abstract up to like a very, very different reality? And like, I started thinking about things, and I immediately started thinking about your moon pals, right?
Yeah.
Because what you did there, which I just think is brilliant, is nobody had the moon. Are you kidding me? Talk to me about the moon pals. By the way, unfairly, you brought me one. And I was going to give it to my grandkids, but they were busy. So one of my teammates was here, and he's got little kids. And I went,
no.
hey, do me a favor, because I knew that my grandkids had them already. You gave it to Patrick.
But
I get the feedback was, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And I didn't tell him anything. I just said, hey, give this to your kids and then text me their reaction.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's used to me asking him to do really bizarre things. And he's like, okay. And so he texted me this morning. He's like, their first instinct was to hug it. And he goes, I've never seen them do that with any other stuffed toy.
Yeah.
And he goes, but then after I read them, the story that goes with it. Like there was this huge transformation instantly.
Yes.
That the Moon Pal became the toy.
And again, that is like, again, you just described the thing. I had everyone tell me to start with either the toy or the book. And I said no. The magic is you mix both of those together. And I think this is, to kind of take it to the tech startup bro chat is, I think this is kind of, again, what we're seeing and what we can kind of expect with where technology might go, right? Like reality is this thing that you have a kind of a feedback, a reaction to happens, right? And, for the last thousands of years, that reaction has happened in a physical state. And the last 20 years, now we have this weird experiment where, in my opinion, we have gone way, way, way too far down this experiment of what is the digital reality. What reaction happens when I have this thing in the digital world? And I think, that is, again, like where I am really interested in is what happens after we get so high in that digital realm where it's not that interesting anymore.
Yeah.
And what happens? How does that correct itself? And that's, again, bring it back to Moon Pals. That's sort of my bet with this is that, you have to have an idea that can be malleable in the right way where the world is going. And I think the world is going into a little bit of this sort of amalgamated mix. And, to just exist in digital is not going to be very interesting. To just exist in physical is not going to be very interesting. It is going to be the masters of this next 20, 30 years is who can, mix all of these things together in a really interesting way, right? And, the book is physical right now. That it comes with a physical toy, but, again, a movie, a show, a YouTube, a game, all of these things, right? Like I wanted both of those things to exist together at once. I wanted the imagination to exist at the same time as the kid experiencing the hug, because that is a different mixture. Not a lot of people have that. Not a lot of people are doing that, right? Like everyone has a kid's YouTube channel that has, 20 million subscribers. There's hundreds of thousands of those. And then, you have the toys on the other end. Who can mix them? Totally different skill. It's actually almost, my bet is that it might not really be possible to do this effectively with old ideas. I think this might be a brand new paradigm that presents a chessboard of, again, like not a binary checkers, right? Like we're kind of moving into a 4D chess world where, you have to be thinking about the digital, the physical, I would call it four quadrants, right? Like there's like four of these main quadrants that are moving together where you kind of have to get all of them together at the same time. And, I think you can see this, my contrarian bet or take on where a lot of this stuff is happening in consumer is that like, to bring it back to the Moon Pals and what I'm working on, like, I was talking about this for a very long time and everyone was like, that's not how the world works. That's not how business is created and your team and this and that. I was like, guys, it's just like so obvious. And then the Barbie movie comes out and, biggest box office, it's getting up there to be the biggest box office ever. I think it's like, it's like in the top 5, I think at this point, around a toy. Now it's like, I have a bunch of people calling me back being like, hey, remember you were raising that money for that movie? Like, okay, like I get it now. Now I get why you're making a movie for a toy. It's like, okay, yeah, like this is totally where the world is going. Now I think it's really interesting to see what's going to happen with the Barbie toy sales, right? And so this is what you're going to start seeing in consumer is my bet is that the ideas that are created, taking into account this new paradigm that we're moving into, to where you're going to be using, AI, physical experience, games, movies, YouTube, all at the same time, you're going to have to make things that are malleable to that. And if you can get just 2, you're really lucky. If you can get 3 or 4, you're going to be pretty powerful. And if you can get a thing that moves around anything, you're going to be really, really, really powerful. And I think Barbie is going to get a few, right? I actually don't know if it's going to really translate to toy sales, because I think they made the movie for a different audience that I don't know is really going to spend $2,000 or $3,000 on their kids on, the idea of a perfect, objective beauty doll. I don't know if the audience that went to saw the movie is going to actually go and purchase that Barbie for the next 5 years. But what I'm poking at is that we're playing a new game on a new chessboard in consumer right now. And Barbie just showed what's possible if you go and you do a strategy around 2 pillars. I think Kanye showed what's possible if you do a strategy around like 4 pillars. And I think this next wave of consumer is going to be who can paint with the big enough brush that can get 5 or 6 of those pillars at the same time. And I think that is sort of, if I'm thinking of, creators and artists and warriors and wizards that are coming together and existing on this archetype, which, by the way, I think we're kind of moving to a new world where there's a lot less room in the middle, and you are either going to be one of these, unbelievable once in a generation creators, or you are not. And that's going to be really tough for a lot of people to grapple with. There's a lot of people that are able to get, 5 to 10 million TikTok followers, and then, have a meetup in Washington Square Park, and absolutely no one shows up. Right. And so I think, and then you have Taylor Swift that just put on an unprecedented experience in the consumer landscape that they're calling basically this unreplicable, never before happened tour. And I think it's going to be more than a tour. Look at the windowing that she just did, right? This is really interesting. She does this anomalous tour, shatters records. You can't not hear about this if you exist on planet Earth, essentially. And she went to the studios to release the live video performance of this, and all the studios wanted to wait. And she, being the genius that she is, says, no, you don't have the windowing right. This is a different thing that is similar, that's about 20% to the right, that needs to come out now. She went around and made a deal with the theaters herself and put the movie out in theaters essentially at the same time as it's winding down. Now she's catching this whole nother wave. What I'm saying is that we are moving into a new game of how to shepherd the consumer's attention into an experience that is interesting to them, because these single pillar approaches are not interesting anymore. And I think, this is a really interesting place to watch where the world is headed through the lens of what are people actually excited about, paying attention to, spending money on. There's not a lot of things out there that you can describe that are getting a reaction, that truthful, objective reaction from a consumer. And the ones that are, you can start to see the elements of this artist is a warrior that is taking a kind of unique path that has never really been carved out before. And I think that's kind of what you're experiencing with a lot of these, weird moments in consumer right now. It's happening across a few different pillars mixed at the same time.
Yeah. And when you were here and we were talking about it, my thesis is very similar to yours. All you have to do is look at the various verticals that O'Shaughnessy Ventures has, and you got it right away. A lot of people would ask me, like, what the fuck are you doing, man? You're making movies? You're doing media? Like you never, like, why are you doing all that? And because we have very similar hypotheses around where things are going.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I said, if you will recall, when the first thing you said was, like, hey, what did you think about Barbie? And I just went, fuck, because nobody got it.
I know.
You got it.
Yeah. We were almost novel for a second.
Right. But I think you're absolutely right about the idea of it demonstrates the concept and opens it up in people's minds, right? So that's a good thing. I think you're probably right also about it was aimed at the wrong audience.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so I think your thesis is probably correct. Whereas Moon Pals and the idea for a movie and stories and all of the things that can come from that is really an exercise in another thing that we share, and that is everything, especially, it's not going to be just consumer. I also think we're going from a world where consumption gets replaced by the people, like those people in the tales, by creation, right? So the ability to do that is hard. And we talked about like the collapse of the classic bell curve. It was really easy when like you aimed everything at the 68% in the middle of that bell curve. You know, that I Love Lucy, 69 million viewers every night. And I think one of the things, or every time it was on, best closest example, Game of Thrones, like 18 million people. And I think one of the things that we're calling the Great Reshuffle, and that's really freaking people out, is this idea that like that central authority, so to speak, right? Like in the world I was born into in 1960, there were 3 networks, there were 2 newspapers that mattered, and that was fucking it, right? And so you had this kind of cohesive belief of society in general, and what's freaking people out is that is gone. That is fragmented. All of the gold is in the tails.
I agree, but I don't think that, you know, again, I think that I don't think we're going to live in a completely different world, right? Like, I think our world gets organized around the truth that is in our soul. And I don't think that human nature really changes much. And, you know, I think, again, like really interesting, like, you know, we could talk about where AI goes. Really interesting is that all of the really good movies about AI, they all end with the AI actually leaving Earth. It's actually like so uninteresting for at a certain point for the human to interact with the AI and the AI to care about the human that, you know, Samantha just leaves and goes and parties with the 1,000, you know, other AIs in a different dimension. So I think, you know, for better or for worse, we are stuck in our soul and in our body. And that soul and body demands a certain amount of things and experiences and feelings. And so, you know, I think we're going through this weird reshuffle. I like that word that you're talking about. It is a reshuffle, but I think that the cards are still going to fall around human nature, right? And so, you know, I think you're still going to have gigantic, you know, brands and consumer experiences, and you're going to have these things. It's not all just going to be like coming from Facebook, right? Like, no, like there's still going to be a crazy demand and scale that you can get to. Just the mechanics of how you get there is going to be a little bit different. I still think, you know, venture capital is funny. Like venture capital did not, you know, everyone thought that we were going to make more entrepreneurs, that we're going to make more companies that are more life-changing. The amount of successful companies, venture capital did not change that outcome. It just got the same outcome in a little bit of a different way. And I think, you know, again, like we're still going to have only a few artists and creators and entertainers that are worth anyone's attention. And I actually am way more optimistic about where this world is headed, because I think, you know, it's going to be for scarier for on a scarier lens for a lot of the, you know, the mid players, is that it's going to be very, very binary. You either have it or you don't. And I've spent most of my life thinking about music and what happens in music and music as a medium. And that is where I kind of, started this whole, that was the medium I was operating in. And, now you see it very, very clearly where you don't get to decide anymore if you want to be a famous musician. You kind of did that with, a few of the 90s and the 2000s with like NSYNC and whatnot. These like manufactured pop acts that were like piped through, and that exists for a very small period of time. And now we're at this moment where, again, like Rich Men from Richmond, right? Like that kid just sat in front of wrote an incredible song, sat in front of a camera and played in the woods, and boom, he's number one. He has it. The market is so efficient and moves through this, like literal liquid medium that it no longer can be gamed by these inefficiencies, and the market just chooses. You don't get to decide if you want to be a famous musician anymore. The market chooses you. And if you have that magic, you will be chosen. And if you don't, there's almost nothing that you can do to game the system anymore to get it. And I think, I think there's really interesting trade-offs that happen there. And I think, again, the it kind of shifts where it's a lot more of a multidisciplinary focus and action, which is why, for the last, basically my entire life, everyone said I've had, bouncing around with this identity crisis and whatnot. I, from day one, have said, I'm doing the same thing. I am flexing the same muscles. It's just the medium that it moves through is only because that's the only interesting battlefield. But now we're getting to a place where there's going to be like a singular battlefield that takes this amalgamation of different types of muscles and mediums. And, again, like I think that I'm just really, really excited about that. I think you're going to have multi-billion-dollar outcomes around, a single person. The teams are going to look very, very different. The value capture is going to look very, very different. The enterprise value is going to be very, very different. Watch how many people start coming for the $300 billion behemoth that Disney is. They can't make money right now. Why? Because they are playing with pipes that are basically irrelevant. And those pipes gave them such a privilege that they now are making such stupid decisions that are so away from that core objective reality human soul that they are going to get punished. I tweeted about this today. I was like, I watched Elemental the other night. Unwatchable. It's just so not true. Like, and my critique was the whole movie could have been a billion times better if they just made the male character the flame and the female character the water, which, for whatever reason plays into this old traditional, frowned upon idea of human nature never changing, which I think is probably a little bit more real. And the divine feminine falls way more into the realm of water, with the, divine masculine falling way more into the flame. And, they switch that up. And so your brain is having this weird uncanny valley that they used to be able to get away with because they owned this top-down machine. Now we are having a whole new, competitive playing field emerge of who can actually make something that is more true than that. And I think that's what the pressure that these, old companies are feeling, where they're getting challenged by a single person sitting in their room that's just saying things that are a little bit more true and a little bit more interesting. And I think you're going to be able to capture value that way in a very short time.
Like masterclass right there about the way I see the world unfolding.
Yeah.
I personally think I'm just so incredibly lucky and grateful to be alive at this time.
Yeah.
Because like things like this just don't happen often.
Yeah.
And what you said about, it's why you see the violent reactions of the old gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck? You mean I can't just run it through these old pipes? No, you can't.
Yeah, they don't care.
That's done. And you're absolutely right about the market's reaction is going to be swift and brutal
Yeah.
because no matter what you do, no matter how many talking heads you try to put around something, if
Yeah.
you do something that does not resonate with human OS,
Yeah.
you're
But
not going to get away
okay,
with
so
it
just
anymore.
an interesting little thing that you talked about of how you think the long tail that creation is actually going to exist on this long tail. I actually don't, for interesting conversation, I actually don't think that that's true. I think you saw this with music. I think you saw this with fashion. Like I remember when on demand, basically now exists where you essentially can make any t-shirt that you want in 5 seconds and you could have it at your door tomorrow. That's essentially as good as this 3D printing idea that's going to be on everyone's desk, that everyone talks about it. Everyone's going to manufacture and make their own thing. Not really, right? Bernard Arnault is now the richest man in the world. If you were to tell someone that 10 years ago that brand, how many pieces did people write about? The $1 billion brand is over, brand is fake, efficiency, this and that. You can measure it this way. And look at, I have access to the factory. Guess what? That's not why someone's buying something. They're buying it because it has this unexplainable magic. And I actually think that power law is going to get really, really intense. Where Loro Piana is going to be worth way more money in the future because it has a mix of these ingredients that you can't fake or buy. And that's going to be way more valuable, right? And you saw this with music where if you were to take a bet in music in the last 20 years of, did you want to go and build this platform, that discovers the up and coming artists that now anyone can create a Grammy type of album in their living room for basically no money. Do you want to make a platform that makes, that captures all of those artists, all this NFT or NFT song stuff? It's not really that interesting because it's not that you can't speculate on that asset class because it's so binary now. Everyone is dancing to Drake in Bushwick, at One Oak, at these places at the same time, or they aren't. And so, if you were to make a bet on, if you were a music man, what would you rather have? The technology that enables the 100,000 creators. I guess it's not the technology. Would you rather own the creators that are now able to create all of this stuff? Or would you rather own, the Taylor Swift masters? I would totally rather own the Taylor Swift masters because those are going to be so much more valuable in the future because now it is unbelievably clear that there is not a lot of humans like Taylor Swift, and not value. Value is essentially scarcity. And that scarcity now is unbelievably apparent and it becomes way more interesting. And so going to a Taylor Swift show is actually probably the only show that's interesting to me because I know that I'm going to get this once in a lifetime moment where I don't really have to take all these other, bets and money on these other things that aren't really even that good that the long tail has been enabled by. So I actually think it's going to become way more extreme where this idea of democratization exists in a sense, but that democratization actually just leads to this, unveiling of the emperor with no clothes, where there's actually, only one star in the room. And so, yeah, I think that I think what we're going to start seeing across these larger, gigantic consumer companies and how you're going to be able to compete with them, is going to be it's going to rhyme with what happened to the music industry, what just happened to D2C, what just happened to media companies. It's going to rhyme with those things and it's going to be all mixed together. And yeah, I think you're right. I'm so pumped. I'm pumped I didn't take venture capital. I'm pumped I don't have 400 employees. I'm pumped that I can basically do whatever I want, whenever I want, and spin up any idea in a very, very quick way with a very, very lean and cheap team. because you asked in the very beginning of the interview, like, how did you do this? How did you create these 4 companies that, have these, hits on their hands? And the answer to that is that I didn't really do anything that special. I just was able to identify, through being essentially unbelievably broke, the only piece of the business that really mattered. And I really didn't pay attention to much else other than that. And I built, a value prize team, or a value capture team around that mix of value, which, ended up, in my opinion, being a better, more fruitful bet than, trying to capture the value in this other way that was, venture capital. I would rather be in my position than be in Casper's position, essentially, is the point.
Yeah. And what's funny about that is that's just looking at my thesis, because I agree with everything you've just said, but from a slightly different angle. So I think when I talk about the long tails, I talk about, like one of my teammates joked, you want to be the eye of Sauron, keeping an eye on what's going on in these tails.
So,
because I think that when you, as you point out, when you can record a song and go to #1, that's very interesting to me. And so I think that the idea abundance will happen mostly in the tails. Now, that does not mean that those ideas are going to all go viral and become super big, like you mentioned.
yes,
Right. But they are actionable in a way that simply wasn't possible, like even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. It's like
new game has emerged.
Brand new game.
Wild West. Let's go.
And so, like, we think, as part of our thesis, that curation and people always look at me askance when I say this. Curation and good taste are going to be incredibly valuable things to be good at.
I will push back a little bit. I don't think curation is as valuable as you think. And I think taste is 1,000 times more valuable than you think. And taste has elements of curation, but I don't, again, like if you look at the past, what would you rather be? Drake, who in my opinion is one of the best curators of our time, or Pitchfork, who was a pure curator? Drake took a piece of that talent of curation and put it into a different vehicle that was positioned to move through the lenses and the pipes of this new emerging world way, way, way better than something like Pitchfork did. And so, if you look at what Drake does, he watches those. He's the eye of the, what did you say?
So wrong. That's from Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings. How did I? Token. What am I doing?
Come on, man. We might even have to take that out, because world building is one of your big talents.
I do. In my mind, I just, in my mind, I kept on saying Palantir. That's how strong is like, I just kept on, I was like, oh, it's the eye of Palantir. I was like, no, that's how technology's ruined my brain. Drake is a curator, and that form of curation in that way is, I agree, it's a piece, it's a bristle in the paintbrush, but it's not valuable on its own anymore. And so, yeah, how many people, like Drake watching these different hits emerge, curating them into his overarching brand, adding in a little Drake flavor, and that curation being a part of his creation process is a lot more interesting to me than just being a creator or a curator, right? And the curators have all died. There really is no music curation anymore. What's a music curator now? I really can't think of one. To me, the best music curators are someone like a Drake, who finds this weird emergent beat in, Nigeria, and curates that and puts his lyrics on top of it. And now I'm experiencing this fun curation mix of this global taste maker that is Drake, that's speaking in a language that's actually moving through the way that we now consume media. So I agree with you that curation and taste are going to be valuable. I don't think they're valuable on their own. I think they're 1,000 times more valuable mixed together.
And we are in total agreement.
Yes.
Maybe I didn't express it the right way, but like, you're absolutely right. And you have to also, it gets back to our conversation about opening your aperture, right? Like, I used to, when you still bought CDs, I used to like go to a Tower Record and literally buy 50 randomly.
Yeah.
And like, why did I do that? Because I thought, I have no idea what's going on. So I would go to the different sections. Like, I was listening to techno when they was called European New Beat. And like, I loved it. And so the idea that you open yourself up to it, like you mentioned with Drake, right? And the Caribbean beats or the African beats, and then adding. Yeah. So we're totally in agreement on that.
Yeah.
All right. We are closing in on when my school marmish nannies will tell me that I have to stop. We haven't even gotten to half of the really cool stuff.
I don't really even know what I just said, so hopefully some of this would be,
which is good. No, it was very good. They actually, there is a cut it, print it when you gave a masterclass on where everything is going. And maybe I'm saying that because I have motivated reasoning, because I agree with you. But I think that the idea of being able to build out all of those pillars, I could not agree more.
yeah.
And this whole idea, in advertising, right? Advertising started as information, right? We call them soap operas because soap companies advertised on them, right? And so if you look at like ads from the beginning of advertising, it's just text. It's a huge block of text.
Yeah.
Where they feel like we need to demonstrate to all of the people all of the reasons why we're better, right? And then contrast that with when Steve Jobs was still in charge, released the iPod ads. You know those ads. Everyone knows those ads because they're so iconic, with them just dancing with the iPod and the not earpods. They had the strings, but like, fucking brilliant and completely different, getting to your idea of faith. All right, my friend, this has been super fun. At the end of all of our podcasts, we create you the emperor of the world for just a single day, not even a single day, just a single moment. You can't put anyone in prison or re-education camp, and you can't kill anyone, but we are going to hand you a magic microphone that you can speak two things into, and you are going to incept the entire world's population with the two things that you speak into this microphone. Everyone who wakes up whenever their tomorrow is going to think, I just had two of the greatest ideas in the world, and I'm going to act on both of them. What are you going to incept?
I'm going to get canceled. Yeah, I'd probably say, I mean, I don't know. Give me an example of someone else's answer. So
No.
Come on. Let me curate. Let me curate.
Hey, man, John, are you kidding me?
All right. I'd say, like, is it to get, I know I'm like being the annoying nerd at the party, but like, is it to get people to do something or like realize something?
That is entirely up to you. I've had both answers.
Okay, I would say, I would restructure everyone's decision-making framework we have totally been like, for lack of a better word, maybe this is just like, but we have been completely convinced that independence is the best framework to make every decision about your life. And it's not only independence, it's essentially independence. And, right there, it's financial independence. I would say I would magically accept everyone into completely flipping that on its head. And I would basically make all of people's decision framework coming around how they actually can be completely dependent in the best way possible. How are you going to be the most dependent on someone else and in return be the most dependable? Which is a totally different framework for making decisions than I want to be, a independent, badass that can go and be a lone wolf that can do whatever he wants, which has essentially been the lore and the decision-making framework we have all worshipped for the past, 100 years. So yeah, I would say, I would make everyone say, basically prioritize figuring out and make decisions around the idea that being dependent and interconnected with as many people as possible is actually the better framework for making decisions than try to make decisions around independence. And then number 2, I have so many that are unbelievably offensive. Number 2 would be to, just have a Coca-Cola.
Love that.
Chill out. You're going to die. Have a Coke. Go figure out how to be the best family member and spouse, and then have a Coke.
Take a walk, man.
Yeah.
Buy the world a Coke. Like, it's not that hard. Those are really interesting to me. Especially the first one. I got to think about that a long time. So that means that it's a good one, because I when I don't instantly react and I really need time to really think about it, that interests me quite a bit. All right, John, tell my audience how you can get more John, man.
Or John. First, you got to buy yourself and everyone a Moonpal. So moonpals.com. Movie's coming. We're doing it. It's the last thing I do. We're doing it. Second, at John H. Fio at Twitter.
Very cool. And spoiler alert, we're going to have you write some books for our new book division over at OSV. I'm going to tease it. I'm not going to give away the ideas because we want people to wait for that. But you literally came up with 2 of the best ideas that I'd heard. And I instantly invited you to our gathering next month, which is going to be a blast.
I got to tell you, I had like one of those can't sleep fever dreams last night. I came up with the best self-publishing book strategy ever.
Oh, I can hardly wait to see it, man.
I have like 10 titles. It'll crush.
I love it. I love it. This is going to be a lot of fun. All right. Thank you, my friend. I will see you soon.
All right, man. Thank you so much.